At my husband's 30th anniversary company gala, under crystal chandeliers and 100 raised glasses, he announced that he was leaving me and that our family's finances would be restructured under new management. The new manager stood beside him, the operations coordinator, half my age. Applause faltered. I felt the floor tilt. Every account I had helped build was frozen under his signature. Every card in my purse already disabled. Cameras flashed. I smiled mechanically because I had no legal right to the microphone. But on the glossy event program, the coordinator's carelessness had printed a vendor invoice number. I recognized one digit wrong, the very clue that would unravel them both. The ballroom smelled of roses and champagne. My palms smelled of metal. For 30 years I had balanced books and raised a family on the pennies left after his investments. Now he stood in his tailored suit, describing our shared history as if it were an outdated spreadsheet. The audience laughed when he said, "She always kept me grounded." They didn't know I had already grounded him with timestamps, contracts, and quiet evidence stored in 3 separate safes 2 months earlier. While updating our estate plan, I'd noticed a vendor named Gleambridge Consulting, claiming a 5-year partnership, yet the incorporation date showed only 90 days. The coordinator's initials appeared on each invoice, countersigned by my husband. The amounts were just under the audit threshold. Routine coincidence, he said. But my instincts, the ones honed through decades of grocery lists and utility bills, told me money was being siphoned away. I began to save copies. Not digital prints he could delete, but paper records slipped into the spine of old cookbooks. Screenshots printed and folded into bank statements. At night, when he claimed late calls with Asia partners, I listened for the echo of our home office door. When he snored beside me afterward, I'd quietly photograph his laptop screen left open to foreign transaction tabs. Every click felt like an act of survival. The coordinator Lena was polite in daylight, deferential in tone, but her perfume lingered on his car upholstery. She arranged meetings only at hotels that offered corporate loyalty points. Still, I never confronted them. Experience had taught me that silence was the best recording device. One morning, a letter arrived from our bank. Unusual activity detected, verification requested. The compliance officer, Mrs. Harding, had once been in my book club. Over coffee, she lowered her voice. "These vendor payments are peculiar. Same routing number. 3 different entities." Her hint was the permission I needed. I filed a preliminary fraud inquiry, not accusing him, simply verifying documentation. It created a timestamp trail beyond his reach. The week before the gala, the company's external auditor confirmed receipt of my anonymous packet. I didn't attend the pre-event rehearsal. Instead, I booked a seat near the stage exit, where auditors would enter. When I dressed that evening, ivory blouse, gray skirt, low heels, I pinned a tiny flash drive behind my belt tag containing every document hash. Now, under the chandelier's glare, he raised a toast to new beginnings. The crowd cheered. I lifted my glass, eyes fixed on that misplaced invoice number printed beside the event sponsors. It would be my evidence of their arrogance. Inside, my heart was quiet, not broken, not furious, just methodical. The decades of restraint that had once made me invisible were now my shield. I had been preparing for this scene long before he knew it existed. When the music swelled, I checked the time. 8:47 p.m. In exactly 13 minutes, the auditor's team would arrive. I touched the wedding ring still on my finger, not as a memory, but as proof of endurance, and whispered so no one could hear, "Let the records speak." The applause died the moment the external auditor's badge glinted in the doorway. It wasn't loud, just the sound of chairs shifting and champagne glasses lowering. My husband didn't notice at first. He was too busy performing, basking in the illusion of control, fingers tracing the stem of his glass while cameras followed his every move. The master of ceremonies paused, unsure whether to continue reading the cue cards. The auditor, Mr. Brazen Collins, a calm man in a navy suit, walked straight toward the stage and whispered something to the sound technician. The microphone volume dropped slightly, but not enough to hide my husband's startled laugh. Of course. Of course. I'll cooperate fully, he said. Voice too high. Anything for transparency. Lena's smile wavered. Her eyes darted toward the back door. She clutched the event folder our program so tightly that the paper bent at the exact place where the misprinted invoice number appeared. I saw it. That small tremor in her hand. Mr. Lewis, Collins said evenly. Before we conclude this celebration, I'd like to clarify a few procurement matters. 3 vendor IDs, Gleambridge, Northview, and Huron appear to share identical routing numbers. Would you mind confirming their ownership? My husband froze mid-breath. The question was surgical. Those are long-standing partners. He replied quickly. Renewed through our standard bidding process. The auditor's brow lifted slightly. Strange. All 3 were incorporated this spring. The crowd murmured. One of the board members straightened in his chair. A donor whispered something to another guest. Glancing toward me, he tried to laugh it off. You know how databases can mislabel records. We'll fix it on Monday. Then, from the second row, a voice cracked through the silence. That's impossible, said Mrs. Everett, the retired accounts payable manager who had worked with him for 20 years. Those vendor names never existed before March. And I know because I processed every vendor file by hand before I retired. Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Mrs. Everett clutched her cane with steady pride, her voice unwavering. I even trained Lena on the new vendor system. My husband's eyes flicked to me. Then to the exit. Lena whispered, We should go. Colin stepped aside, blocking the path. One more question. Mr. Lewis, could you tell us where Gleambridge's physical office is located? Of course. He began confidently. Thereon his words faltered. Downtown. I think no Southport. Southport doesn't exist on their filings. Collins replied, A murmurspread. Someone in the back turned on their phone camera. The flash lit up his sweating face. He sat still, hands folded. Every second of silence was heavier than any scream I could have uttered. Lena attempted to interrupt. This isn't the place. Actually, the auditor interrupted. It's the only place. Our board chair requested transparency. These guests represent the company's largest stakeholders. The room turned against him. Not with anger yet, but with the slow, collective realization that something dark had been happening right under the chandeliers. My husband's voice rose. Defensive now. Are we really doing this in front of everyone? This is my night? No. See ya, Collins said, his tone still calm. This is the company's night. And the company deserves the truth. Someone at the bar whispered, Check the invoices. Another person muttered, Was that her name on the file? The whispers multiplied, until the music had no chance of returning. He looked around for support, but none came. His charm had evaporated, replaced by the raw sound of his own breathing. The crowd no longer saw the confident CEO. They saw a man cornered by his own accounting. At that moment, I felt something loosen inside me. Not victory, just a quiet release of years spent pretending not to know. Lena tugged on his sleeve. We can fix this, she hissed. He didn't respond. His jaw clenched, and his voice cracked as he forced a laugh. All right. Fine. If you want documents, I'll bring them Monday. Collins nodded. Good. Because the preliminary findings suggest those documents were generated on your home network at 217 a.m. under your login. The audience gasped again. Cameras clicked. My husband's knuckles turned white. You can't prove intent. The auditor folded his notes. Intent becomes clear when the same pattern repeats 32 times. The microphone hissed as he turned it off. Silence fell again, except for the faint hum of the chandeliers. I leaned back in my chair, breathing through the tremor in my chest. The plan was working, but this was only the beginning. The real unraveling would come when the bank spoke. And that moment was only hours away. The morning after the gala. Headlines read, "Company under audit review. CEO questioned at celebration." The photograph showed him mid-blink. Lips parted in denial. He stormed into our kitchen at dawn. Tea crooked. Eyes red. "Are you proud of yourself?" he hissed. I didn't answer. The coffee pot hissed between us. He pounded the counter so hard the mug cracked. "You leaked it." I looked at him calmly. The truth leaked itself. By noon, the board had issued a formal statement he would step aside pending investigation. His access cards were disabled. The coordinator's desk was cleared. Still, he refused to believe it was over. "They'll see through this," he muttered as he packed, stuffing shirts into a suitcase, like a man escaping a fire. But it wasn't over. It was only tightening. 3 days later, he was summoned for a deposition with the company's legal counsel and the external auditor. I was invited as a silent witness since part of the marital property was tied to company shares. He tried to project confidence, hair slicked, cufflinks gleaming, but the tremor in his thumb betrayed him. The room was clinical gray carpet. 1 camera. 1 microphone. 3 witnesses. Collins, the auditor, began gently, asking about vendor relationships and oversight. My husband answered smoothly, rehearsed lines rolling off his tongue. Then Collins asked, "Who approved these invoices? Myself," he said, on whose authority he hesitated. "As CEO. And who cross-checked them?" Lena did. Was operations coordinator. And when she was absent? He blinked. "I did." "So, in effect, you approved your own transactions." His jaw tightened. "I trust myself more than anyone." That sentence lingered in the air. Collins glanced at the company lawyer, who pressed play on a short audio file. It was the gala recording, faintly echoing. "Margins don't matter if I control the approvals." He froze. "That was out of context," he said quickly. "Please explain the context." The lawyer replied. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The silence stretched until the camera's red light reflected off his sweating forehead. His hands twitched. "You people never appreciated what I built," he snapped. "You think I'm the villain? But I made this company. Those invoices kept it alive." By falsifying them, Collins asked quietly. That broke him. "Everyone does it," he shouted, slamming his fist on the table. "You think any CEO gets this far without bending a few lines?" The room went still. The lawyer pressed stop. "Thank you, Mr. Lewis," she said. "We have your statement on record." He realized too late what he had done, admitted knowledge, motive, and intent. The camera had captured everything. When we stepped outside, reporters waited by the curb. Flashbulbs burst like tiny explosions. He tried to shield his face. I walked past without looking back. That night, I sat at my desk and reread my notes from months ago, the night I'd first noticed the duplicate routing numbers. Every line, every page had led to this point. There was no satisfaction in his collapse, only the faint ache of closure. The next day, the board called an emergency meeting. Collins presented his findings, forged approvals, shell accounts, false expense reports. The vote to terminate was unanimous. The company council drafted a resignation and forfeiture agreement. When they asked me to attend the final session, I agreed not as his wife, but as a witness. He entered pale and silent, eyes hollow. "You planned this," he whispered. "No," I said softly. "You did." He signed the papers, the pen scraping like a verdict. Outside, the spring rain began to fall, steady and clean. For the first time in years, I breathed without counting. 2 weeks later, the board's decision became public. Every outlet ran the same headline: Lewis resigns amid fraud investigation. The words no longer stung, They sounded distant, like the echo of a door finally closing. He moved into a hotel near the airport while the lawyers finalized the restitution. I didn't block his number, but he stopped calling after the third voicemail, each one shorter, smaller, until silence replaced his voice completely. When the restitution funds cleared, the company's foundation announced a scholarship and retraining trust for longtime employees. The first recipients were the janitors, the cafeteria staff, and a group of single mothers from accounting people who had quietly kept the business alive. The community applauded. For once, our name brought comfort instead of scandal. The auditors finished their report. It confirmed every clue: the mismatched vendor codes, the forged timestamps, the resort Wi-Fi logins matching his electronic signatures. The coordinator's cousin had registered the shell companies. Both were charged with fraud. Justice, written not in rage but in paperwork. The house grew quiet again. I rearranged the furniture the way it had been before his ambition filled every corner. The silence was not empty. It was clean. My mornings returned to small things: making tea, feeding the dog, reading the paper without scanning the financial section first. Mrs. Harding, the bank officer, stopped by one afternoon with a box of pastries. She smiled. "You were right to trust the numbers." I wasn't brave, I told her. Just thorough. She laughed softly. That's the same thing. I opened a new account in my own name, deposited a small amount, and wrote one phrase on the memo line: for dignity. It wasn't revenge that mattered anymore. It was proof that honesty could survive betrayal. One evening, I walked past the old office building, now under new leadership. Through the glass, I saw young employees laughing by the elevator. The place felt lighter, as if it had exhaled. Back home, I opened the drawer where I had kept every piece of evidence. One by one, I fed the papers into the shredder. The sound was steady, final. When the last page disappeared, I looked out the window at the streetlights flickering on. Justice hadn't arrived in a dramatic explosion. It had unfolded quietly. Like dawn, I poured myself a cup of chamomile tea and let the steam touch my face. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to measure time in fear. I wrote a small note to myself and taped it on the refrigerator. You didn't lose a husband. You lost a Lear. Then I sat down at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and began drafting a letter to the scholarship recipients, signing it not as Mrs. Libri, Lewis, but simply, Margaret. If this story moved you, remember that every quiet act of courage matters. Like, share and subscribe for more real-life inspired stories of strength, betrayal, and justice. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update. Leave a comment below. Your story might inspire the next one.